Well, okay, I'll just start. Again, thank you for those of you who have been here every day. For those of you who are just joining us today, welcome. We're here to learn from each other. And I just would like here, Eric, would you be able to kick this off, maybe go through your conversation, your presentation, and I'm going to have one, and we want to do a little bit of tag teaming here, if you will. So I might chime in while Eric's talking. I'm going to allow him to chime in. We'll ask each other maybe to chime in, whatever. But Eric, if you could share your screen and maybe go through yours first. If you're ready to do that, we'll start with you, and you can introduce yourself and tell us a little who you are, and then we'll take it off from there. So
sounds good. Lamont, is there a way to share my screen? All right. So I'm Eric Rosenbaum. I am the owner of Rose Tree Consulting, and Rose Tree Consulting is a crop consulting company based in Berks County, Pennsylvania. We provide integrated pest management, crop scouting services to farms. We do soil testing. We write a lot of regulatory documents, nutrient management plans, conservation plans, odor plans, and we also do a lot of work in the precision ag sector to help farms manage their data and turn those into decision-making opportunities. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today is how farms make decisions and some of the things that we use to help them make decisions and to facilitate conversation on the farm between us and the farmer, as well as us and all the farm's team members that they may have to help them make decisions. And then I wanted to move into talking about some of the agronomic impacts of cover crops, that when you're out in the field or when you're talking to farmers about cover crops and adoption of cover crops, that we can give them some good information to show how cover crops can make agronomic impacts and just what we're looking for out in the field. So I'll first start off just with a quick overview of Rose Tree. Like I said, we're dealing mostly with farms in eastern Pennsylvania and New Jersey. That's where our customer base is the strongest. We have a lot of certified crop advisors on our staff. Me personally, I have the Certified Crop Advisor certification. I also have the Sustainability Specialty certification, as well as the 4R Nutrient Stewardship certification and the Resistance Management certification. So a plug for all you CCAs out there today. Think about getting the sustainability certification. Think about doing the 4R certification. Both of those certifications would really help you work in the sustainability platforms with your customers and just help move them along to where they want to be. So we feel that in Rose Tree, the CCA certification kind of gives us credibility and pushes us to evolve as consulting agronomists. It definitely establishes a baseline for what our customers expect from us and the quality of agronomists that we send out into the field. CCA program does give us a lot of opportunities to interact with researchers and with peers, and really just makes us better positioned to serve our customers and influence their decision making. So we feel pretty strongly that our employees continue their education, whether it's through CCA certifications or other things. It's just really important for us and our business model to be as educated as we can, as well rounded as we can, because that's what allows us to serve our customers the way that we want to serve them. So farm influencers, and I think farm influencers take many, many shapes and forms. You can be an ag retailer, a CCA, consultant like myself. You can be a seed salesperson, an equipment dealer, a banker, a loan officer, accountant, extension agent, conservation district staff, NRCS, DEP, you name it. The list goes on and on and on as far as who is influencing the farms that we're dealing with. Farm organizations like the Pennsylvania No-Till Alliance or Farm Bureau, the Corn Growers Association, they all have influence in how farmers make decisions. You wouldn't want to forget about veterinarians and nutritionists, flock managers. On the dairy side of things, their milk markets certainly have an influence with how they're making decisions. Same way as state federal regulators. Everybody has an influence on that farm and how they make decisions. One thing that I would want to point out to you is figure out where you fit in. When I'm doing consulting on farms, oftentimes I know I'm kind of working my services in with the ag retailer, the seed salesperson, whoever they're dealing with on their milk marketing, their nutritionist, their veterinarian. All of those people are also giving the farmer advice and helping them move in the direction that the farm wants to go to achieve their goals. So it's up to me to try to figure out where I fit in. Where I fit into that whole team, who has the most influence on the team, how do I influence the people that have the influence on the farmer to get to where I want to go, and really how much time will it take me to become that trusted advisor on the farm. We always tell our agronomists that when you're out there working in the field, always be yourself, play to your strengths. You certainly don't know all the answers, and it's okay to tell a farmer that you don't know all the answers. We want to be able to work with our farms in a way that they can make better decisions. And we find that most of our farmers, when they're making decisions in the field about their crop management or crop growth, they're making decisions for one of four reasons. They either want to improve bottom line economics, they want to address identified production problems, they want to meet some regulatory compliance, or they're trying to position for the future. And they're going to use their team of influencers in order to help them answer those questions. So my perspective as a consultant, when I'm providing recommendations or when I'm meeting with my customers to talk about what we're going to do for the coming year, I'm keeping those four things in mind, that as they're looking to make decisions, whether it's a decision about cover crops or whether it's a decision about a variety of corn, these are the four things that they're really trying to fit that decision in. So from a cover crop perspective, I never really go onto a farm and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're not planting cover crops. We've got to get you into cover crops. I'm going to take the approach where I'm going to talk to the customer and say, look, when I was out soil testing your field this fall, particularly in your soybean stubble, I noticed your soybean stubble fields are just not giving you the residue that you need. And maybe it's because you've reduced your soybean populations. 10 years ago, you used to plant your soybean populations at 200,000. Now your populations are 125. We're not getting the residue from our soybeans today that we used to. I think I'm seeing a difference in erosion. I think I'm seeing a difference in your early corn germination and growth because your soils are just harder because we don't have that residue there. Maybe it's time to start thinking about putting cover crops on the landscape as a way to try to meet some of those production issues that we're seeing. So those are the type of conversations that we're having with our farmers to get practices adopted. We need to be able to take a look at the system that they're doing and how they're interacting with their other members of their team, and then figure out how we're going to get to where we want to go by addressing one of those four things. Hopefully, cover crops are addressing more than one of those four things. Obviously, cover crops are meeting regulatory compliance, helping position them for the future. It can be used to address production problems and certainly have a bottom line economic impact. So when you're thinking of your cover crop conversations, always go back to who is the influencer on the farm, how you can create that team to move what your goals forward and get more cover crops or get more practices involved on the farm. I think sustainability always plays in to our conversations with our customers. We want to make sure that with the services that we provide, we're setting them up to be sustainable. Everybody has their own definition of sustainable. Steve, after I get done this slide, I'm going to ask you what your definition of sustainable is. My definition of sustainable is the 4R definition of sustainable, not just because I serve as the executive director of the 4R Nutrient Alliance, but because I really think it's fairly comprehensive. So the 4R sustainability concept is that you have to be economically sustainable, environmentally sustainable, and socially sustainable. And each one of those are equal. And we do that through managing the source rate, time, and place of the nutrients that we're applying. I like that definition. I think it's fairly comprehensive. It's holistic in nature. It lets people realize that sustainability is not just environmental sustainability. It's not just economic sustainability. Each of those are equal in terms of how the farm sets itself up for the future. When I ask my customers what sustainability means to them, this is the answer that I get. The farmers will tell me that sustainability means staying in business. Sustainability means passing the farm on to the next generation and leaving it better than I found it. Steve, I don't know if you hear any different kind of definitions of sustainability from farms, but I would make the case that my farmers that are saying that is pretty much the same thing that I'm saying. They're just using different words.
Yeah, no, I agree totally. You know, as I think about sustainability, that was kind of the buzzword, you might say, that came out of the 90s into the early 2000s. It really applied to no-till and the beginning use of cover crops, how I see it on the farm level. And I think here in the last several years, the regenerative agriculture is kind of like taking sustainability to the next level. It's a more intentional use of cover crops, more intentional thoughts towards soil health. You know, the word sustain has served us well 1 to 2 decades ago. But now it's like, you know what, we can do better than sustain. We can improve, we can regenerate. That's why that word regenerative agriculture is alive and well today. It also now, I think going on from sustainability, the aspect of diversity and all that enters in. So I don't, maybe that's your next slide here, but whatever. You've laid it out pretty well, and there's different nuances, but generally speaking, staying in business is, when you talk to farmers, that's definitely right up there, like you have indicated. So yeah, it's good. That's good. Good work you have there, Eric.
Yeah, I think sustainability can be it can be both a top-down approach, and the webinar series this week did a really good job of highlighting what Campbell's Soup is doing and what the Turkey Hill project is doing. Eric Souter on Tuesday did a very nice job of outlining kind of some of the future top-down sustainability concepts that are going to be coming our way. I think sustainability can also be grassroots. Sustainability can be the Pennsylvania No-Till Alliance. It can be the Pennsylvania Association for Sustainable Agriculture. It can be individual farms' decisions. And I think that's the fun thing about sustainability, that it all along the production line, there are sustainability conversations and sustainability concepts that are coming up. I think for my customers, when I think of sustainability and what they need to do, where they need to go, I think they need to incorporate soil health practices first and foremost. They need to be able to adopt appropriate technology for their farm. They need to be improving nutrient use efficiency. They need to understand society's view of agriculture, and they really do need to have that laser focus on economics. If they don't have that laser focus on economics, they're just not going to be able to meet their goals for sustainability and really for their family. I would say that profitable farms, they're more likely to invest in conservation. They're more likely to try new things. They're more likely to seek out innovation and tell their story. And profitable farms get passed down to the next generation. So that's a very important thing to understand, that all the farms that you're working with in your daily jobs to do whatever part of agriculture you're involved in, we need those farms to be profitable in order to address the environmental issues that we deal with. So just looking at my customers and thinking about how they increase their bottom line revenue, how they increase profitability, there's really only a handful of ways that farmers get paid. And it's important for my staff to understand that, so that when we're putting our services in place and providing advice to farms, that it leads to addressing one of these 5 bullet points. It's either increasing their per unit production, which is increasing yield. It's increasing the scale of their farm. It's reducing production costs, increasing efficiency, or selling products at a premium. Those are the 5 ways that my customers get paid. And Steve, is there anything that I'm missing when you look at your farm? Is there a 6th one?
Well, you should have gave me a warning on that, Eric. I mean, I like the bottom when they're selling product at a premium. Kind of can mean a lot of different things. It's telling our story. I'm all about trying to capture nutrient density and particularly the vegetables I grow. I think it applies to corn and soybeans as well. But I just think there's still opportunities out there. Some farmers are going to have to get a little creative. That's where I like the story of sustainability right now is as popular as ever. And how can you leverage that on your particular farm? Obviously, some farmers just aren't cut out to do that. And I get that. Other farmers certainly are. So I'll just, I guess, leave it at that, Eric. I think you got it well covered.
Yeah, from my perspective, I'm going to take what the services that we offer, and I'm going to try to overlay that on a farm. And we're going to try to look at just making sure that the goals of the services that I provide match up with the goals of the farm. And so I kind of break it into four categories. That the goals that I have when I work with a customer is, number one, I want to increase production and mitigate their risk. So that happens in a couple of different ways. We're increasing production through some of our fertility recommendations. We're increasing production through adoption of new practices. We're mitigating risk through adoption of traits. We're mitigating risk through adoption of cover crops and other practices, but there's a lot of things that we do on the daily basis to increase production and mitigate risk on farms. Second thing that we want to do with all the farms that we work with is we want to improve their nutrient use efficiency. The easiest way to think about that is nitrogen use on corn. Traditionally, universities will calculate that it takes about a pound of nitrogen to produce a bushel of corn. And with today's hybrids and with today's technology and practices, we can get that down to 0.8, 0.75. And so that's the direction that we want to head. We want to make sure that the nitrogen that farmers are applying are getting taken into the plant and are not washing off into the streams, are not getting tied up in other places. We want the fertilizer and the manure that our farmers apply to go into the plant. So that's improving their nutrient use efficiency. Third thing that we really look at is kind of the regulatory side of things. Protecting the soil is extremely important in what we do. Our farmers recognize that if they don't protect the soil, it's their livelihood. They're going to lose yield. They're going to not have that sustainable production as time goes by. So that goes to kind of improving their resiliency. What do we need to do from a production standpoint or from a decision-making standpoint to improve their resiliency? So that can look like picking better corn hybrids, picking hybrids that have higher drought stress, picking hybrids that withstand early season stresses. Protecting the soil certainly is a cover crop thing. And I would make the case that everything I have on this list here can in some way, shape or form be turned into a cover crop conversation. The last thing I have up here is vetting new products and practices and managing input costs. You know, our customers really expect us to be a driver of new technology and new information. They expect us to share with them when new products are coming on the market. They expect us to understand how those products can be positioned on their farm for success. And they really expect us to help manage their overall input costs. We're not going out there simply trying to slash their budgets and slash the things that they buy, but we certainly want to make sure that products and practices that they bring on the farm return value. And we want to be able to help calculate that value. And that comes from just being in the field and figuring out how their practices and how their decisions are resulting in crop growth and yield results. So that's kind of what we're looking at. From a cover cropping perspective, I think my personal cover crop goals is I want to see more cover crops on the landscape, particularly soybean stubble. I think we have a lot of risk on our shaly, hillier soils in Pennsylvania for erosion and for sediment loss on those soybean stubbles. So I really want to see, cover cropping that improves bottom line economics, addresses some of the identified production problems, helps us meet regulatory compliance, and positions farms for the future. And I think cover crops have a big part in that. It really starts with asking the farm what their cover crop goal is. Hopefully they have a cover crop goal. If they don't have a cover crop goal, it means we need to kind of reset the conversation and help them figure out why cover crops would be an important part of their system. but figure out what their goal is. You know, are they looking for soil protection? Are they looking for nutrient scavenging? Do they need living roots? Do they want nitrogen production? Do they need diversity? Are they trying to increase organic matter? Or are they just looking for forage? First have to figure out what that goal is. Then we need to figure out what information the farm needs or their influencing team needs in order to make the decision that you want them to make. And then the third thing is, if they make the decision that you want them to make, what will it take to implement that successfully? So if they're currently not doing cover crops and you're going to give them enough information to make them decide and make them choose to plant cover crops, what happens next? You know, how do we help implement that choice successfully? Because we do not want farms to adopt a practice and have that practice just outright fail without knowing why. It's inevitable that they're going to adopt something and it's not going to work out quite the way that we intended it to. But as long as we have information to back it up, and we're talking about it through the year, it's typically not something that they're going to walk away from. But we want to make sure that when they're making cover crop decisions, that we're setting them up for success. And typically we're doing that. We're trying to figure out what crop, what scenario, what acre we're going to have the lowest risk and the most success from, and then focus on that. So focusing on soybean stubble to put a rye cover crop out because we think there's too much erosion, where we think that there's not enough residue and we get a lot of raindrop impact causing our soils to become hard in the spring, are production practices that we can talk about and get our customers thinking more about cover crops in terms of protecting their whole system, mitigating risk, and managing production. So I'm going to move on. And any questions or comments on that, Steve, before we kind of move on to some of the agronomic stuff?
No, maybe a little bit reflection, a little bit back when we were talking about sustainability and all that. Just a thought here about there's opportunity for farmers to, sometimes we call it vertical integration or use of co-ops, and co-ops don't work all the time. But I guess I just wanted to get that in there, that there's ways that farmers need to work together with other people. Sometimes it's not just farmers, but especially in marketing and taking advantage of this story they have to share and what they're doing for the environment. You laid this out really well here, and how to talk to farmers and how to get the right mindset. I talked a lot about that last couple of days. So yeah, I really it's just really good, Eric, to hear your perspective. It mirrors mine as well. So good stuff.
Yeah, I think one of the things you pointed out earlier in the week was, fire your agronomist if they don't have a shovel.
Yeah.
That's 100% true. If we all carry shovels, we have shovels in our car, we have shovels on our four-wheeler. We're always out digging in fields, because if you're not digging in fields, you're not truly identifying what's going on, and you're just not giving the farm the information that they need for decision making. So if there's one thing I can pass along to the people in the audience, is make sure you have a shovel in your car. Make sure the shovel gets dirty. Use it. It's a simple tool, but it's a tool that you can use to have some really good conversations and educate your customers on what's going on in their fields and why it's going on. The next thing I think I would pass along is another comment that you had made earlier in the week, Steve. When you're talking to farmers, just be yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Don't try to pretend to be something that you're not. When you're working with a farmer, even though you may be the only person talking to that farmer at the time, you're part of a team, and understand how you fit on that team. I spend a lot of time trying to figure out where my lane is on farms, where I fit in, how I function best, how I make the most effective change on the farm. And a lot of that's just figuring out what lane I should be in. Always have my side mirrors and my rear view mirror adjusted to figure out where other people are on that advisory team. But in order to be effective and get practices on the landscape, I really need to know where I fit. And that just takes time. Just takes time talking to the farmer and just being yourself. You're never going to have all the answers. If you don't have the answers, tell them you'll get back to them. When we onboard new agronomists, to onboard a new agronomist to do the work that we want them to usually takes about 3 years until they see everything, because when you plant corn for a 2-week period, and then you don't see that again for 365 days. And so it takes a couple of years until you really have enough experience to provide good advice. And so it's important for young people that are just starting out to just pick something that you're going to focus on. And when I go onto a farm, when I was just starting out 20 years ago, when I was just starting out in crop consulting, I wasn't an expert on herbicides. I wasn't an expert on a lot of things, but I picked one thing. I picked diseases, and I really read as much as I could on diseases. And when I would go onto a farm, I would focus a lot of the conversation on disease. Yeah, I could kind of corner myself into an area that I was proficient at, and it helped give the customers a sense of that they were just more comfortable. They got the sense that I knew what I was talking about. And then from there, I was able to kind of build my education and become proficient in other aspects of crop growth too. So that's what we start off with our new employees when they onboard with us. Just pick something that you're going to focus on. You're going to call our customer up and you're going to tell them, look, I'm going to come out and scout your corn today, and I'm going to look for X, Y, and Z. And then you go out and look for X, Y, and Z. Go talk to them about X, Y, and Z. And if they ask you questions about something outside of that, tell them you'll get back to them. But at least you have a defined role, and you've defined that role. They did not define it for you. And it allows you to be more successful and more effective in the services that we provide. So the onboarding process is, yeah, it just takes a lot of time. So does gaining the trust of farmers. So I want to move the next part of this conversation into the field. And once farmers make the decision to plant a cover crop, they're obviously going to make a number of other decisions. And we've talked about these decisions throughout the week here: cover crop establishment, cover crop termination, and then finally cash crop establishment. The cover crop establishment, I don't think there's a whole lot different I can share that Steve hasn't already shared. I do see, as time goes by, more cover crop being planted with bulk fill planters instead of grain drills. I think that's a trend that will continue. People have 12-row, 16-row planters now, and they can put 200 bushels of cover crop in the bulk fill and go out and plant. So I think we'll continue to see more 15-inch row cover crop. The picture I have here is 30-inch row cover crop. This was a cover crop that a dairy farm in Cumberland County had planted with their 4-row corn planter. And they went out and put 2 bushels of rye, and it worked out great. Their intention is to plant green right through that. They'll just go right in between the rows in the spring and be able to plant their corn and then burn off the cover crop later. So Steve, from a cover crop establishment perspective, what trends are you seeing in terms of how farmers are establishing the crop?
I definitely agree with you. There's slowly but surely more people are using what we call precision planters. There's now some seed discs available to accommodate even mixes. So I concur. I think particularly here in the East, in the Mid-Atlantic, where people are getting they're realizing the importance of drilling it versus broadcasting. And I'll actually talk about broadcasting later when I'm on, but and I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but just getting it done right, treating your cover crop like your cash crop, like I've said like 20 times now, that's definitely a part of that. So being more intentional about the way you establish your cover crop, I see that beginning to happen. So I'll just again concur with you on that, Eric, in that regard.
So, and I would make the case, Steve, that when a farmer plants a cover crop, they're thinking about their cash crop when they're planting it.
Yeah.
When you're planting your hairy vetch and triticale, aren't you thinking about pumpkins?
Absolutely. And I like what you said here with your example here, this 30-inch cereal rye, 15-inch cereal rye, triticale. It does make the planting green a little easier because you have kind of a path created that you might not have as much hairpinning and some of the challenges we associate with that. You might not get quite the weed control, but it depends what people's objectives are on that. So all this kind of creativity we hear is important. And, it comes back to what you're trying to accomplish and what equipment do you have on hand now that can do the job. And then at a certain point, you start to see trends and you'll maybe get equipment, upgrade equipment to do a better job. And I think we see that creativity coming out in farms in that regard.
Yeah, I see it really starting with understanding what their goal is. Identify that right off the bat. Once you know what their goal is, then work backwards to that cash crop establishment. And through working backwards, you're going to have conversations about seeding rates, species selection, the planting equipment, and then you're going to transition into talking about cover crop termination and what's going to be the best way to terminate that cover crop. And there again, that depends on the goal too, right? If you have somebody who's going to plant green, your termination methods are going to be a whole lot different than if you have somebody who's going to terminate that cover crop 3 weeks before they plant. From a herbicide interaction standpoint, I'd always want to point out to people, make sure you're always using labeled rates and you're using the proper adjuvants when you're doing your burn down and when we're making these applications. I definitely want people thinking about soil residual herbicides. Now this picture I have here in the middle is a cover crop mix. It's a half a bushel of oats, half a bushel of barley, half a bushel of wheat, and a couple of pounds of, I think this was canola or some kind of a rapeseed. And it was planted in October and it was burned off in late April before they planted corn. And when you look at that corn crop, you would be hard pressed to say that there is a cover crop there unless you saw the cover crop actually right there. They burned it off really early, didn't get a whole lot of biomass production. But they had one sprayer skip in the field, and from that sprayer skip, you could really see how that cover crop could produce biomass. But from a termination standpoint, the closer you get to planting when you terminate that cover crop. So if I'm going to terminate my cover crop the day I plant, or within a couple days of planting, or even after I plant in a planting green situation, but the closer the window between termination and planting, the less herbicide products you have to choose from. So that kind of reduces the amounts of chemistry that you're able to choose from. And when we're trying to put together a comprehensive weed management plan, we want to get 5-6 modes of action on that farm. Now, cover crops count as a mode of action. We'll talk about that later, but we still want to be able to get 4 or 5 other modes of action on the farm. And when we're doing green planting or when our termination is right up against the planting window, the amount of products we can use, the amount of chemistry goes down. Genetically modified crops help with that. If you have Roundup Ready soybeans, if you have Enlist soybeans or dicamba soybeans, it really gives us the flexibility to manage some of these weeds post-plant and allow that cover crop to come up and give you the biomass production that you want. I'm not out here saying that, you know, GMOs are great and everybody should be planting them. I think GMOs are a very effective tool to allow us to address some soil health issues. I think if you went back in time and you looked at how farmers adopted no-till back in the 1990s, I think the advent of Roundup Ready technology really gave our customers the confidence to make that move to no-till. And I would say the same thing about some of our cover crop management, that those GMO products, while not 100% necessary, give our farmers the added confidence to go in and plant those crops and manage them. So just thinking about cover crop termination, definitely want you still talking to farms about having enough modes of action on the farm to prevent weed resistance. Certainly want them thinking about, if they're going to let that cover crop grow 36 inches high, how we're going to get coverage. If we have a soil applied herbicide that is going to prevent weeds from germinating, that herbicide needs to be on the soil surface. And if we have a 36-inch high cover crop, how does it affect that? Probably need to modify some of our herbicide choices and herbicide applications in order to get that effective weed control that we're looking for. The other thing that I would want to bring up about cover crop termination is be aware of some of the pest interactions that can occur. We don't see it all the time, but there are certainly green bridges that occur between a cover crop and a cash crop. Maybe once or twice a year, we'll see a situation where aphids carry over from a rye cover crop into corn, where thrips carry over from a small grain silage crop into corn, where a disease will carry over. It doesn't happen all the time, and it's not common, but be prepared for it and be looking for it, because it does happen. Most of the time, it's simply an acknowledgement that it happened, and you talk to the farmer about it. It's not situations where we have to go out and make rescue pesticide applications, but we definitely want our customers to be aware when things like that occur. So Steve, do you see a lot of the green bridge interactions in your fields?
Generally, no, but it can happen. I think what we're starting to see is what I'm going to call the veteran no-tillers, cover croppers, the guys who are 5 to 10 years into this, that then those incidences do go down. That's generally, I'm going to say, a worldwide phenomenon. So in that transition time, you could experience some of that, and that's just part of kind of lifting up the ecological beneficial insects that can take care of some of the ones that are pests. So that's a very broad statement, but that's generally what we see. With that being said, I put a lot of miles on the four-wheeler from when the corn spikes until it's about V4. Just saying. I still want to know what's going on. If there's any issues, slugs, you could say. Sometimes I haven't had cutworms, but I've heard of people that has that. Army worms, maybe usually that's kind of geographical and you hear about it. So you need to do your scouting. And one of the problems is people listen to a very passionate farmer about all these great things they've done, and they feel like they'll just do it and everything's going to turn out fine. But every farm has a different ecosystem. And so you still need to do your due diligence. And that's part of what you do with your team, Eric, is just following after this. But generally speaking, the green bridge starts to go away once you get into a healthy system.
Yeah, I think the green bridge is an interesting conversation. I think in a natural ecosystem, you would expect things to carry over. That I don't think just because you terminate your cover crop that all of the insects and all of the pathogens terminate with it. They're still all there. It's just a matter of the crop that you're planting into that cover crop. Does it have the resistance packages that it needs? Are you choosing hybrids that have good disease packages? Are you choosing hybrids that are going to resist early season stresses that perhaps you're going to find a little bit more of? Slugs are an interesting one. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But when we think about this cash crop establishment, Steve, I would make the argument that most of the problems that we face with no-till and cover crops, when it relates to cash crop establishment, it all happens when the planter is still in the field. It's people not paying attention to what they're doing, or they're putting the wrong variety in the wrong situation. No-till, 80% of the issues that we see in no-till arise when the planter is still in the field. It's seed placement, seeding depth, uniformity of spacing, all things that are basic things that people just aren't paying close enough attention to. So if the people in the audience, if you're advising farmers on no-till, if you're trying to get adoption of cover crops and planting green, biggest thing is be there when they plant. Be there with your shovel, dig around, make sure they're planting 2 inches deep for corn, inch for soybeans or small grains, but make sure they're consistently and uniformly placing that seed where it needs to be. Because if we don't get the basics right, they're not going to be happy with the production system that you're advocating for. So that's kind of some of the things I want you to be aware of, just moving into the field and transitioning from planting that cover crop and then moving towards terminating the cover crop and finally planting your cash crop. Once that cash crop germinates and it starts to emerge, like Steve said, riding that four-wheeler, walking through those fields is critically important for understanding how the system is working, and understanding how you can educate your customers on that system and where the paybacks are. So as we go through the next series of slides here, up in the upper right-hand corner, I wanted to point out that some things, it's a very short payback, and some things it's easy to show the farmer, while other things it takes a little bit longer. So we're going to go through this in the context of how cover crops impact the agronomic system. And from an insect management standpoint, there's 4 things that I'd want to talk about here: below ground pests, above ground pests, beneficial insects, and then finally insecticides and seed treatments. From a below ground pest standpoint, aside from corn rootworm, right? If you're planting continuous corn, you will need to still use rootworm protection on that corn. But you take rootworm out of the conversation and you start thinking about other below ground pests, whether it's white grub, garden simflan, wireworm, some of the other ones. It's been my experience that when you transition from no-till into cover crops plus no-till, that those below ground pest populations do not go up. They either stay the same or we slightly see them go down, but simply moving to that cover crop does not increase the amount of below ground pests that we look at. There's always exceptions to that. There's probably 1 or 2 situations a year where we have issues with white grubs or a garden simflan or some other random secondary pest. But by and large, when we're adopting cover crops, we are not seeing an increase in below ground pests. Above ground pests, I would put slugs into that category. Most of our people that are using cover crops are just using a fairly simple mix: rye, wheat, barley, oats. Maybe they're throwing in a little bit of clover. We see less slugs where people have cover crop compared to where they don't. We've had a couple situations over the years where people will plant cover crops and eventually they run out of seed, and sometimes that seed where they run out is halfway across the field. So you've got a great comparison. You can go out to that spot and you can visually assess what's going on, where the cover crop is planted versus where it's not. And almost every time there is more slug damage where there is no cover crop compared to where there is a cover crop. And that's been really eye-opening for our customers to see that. So we usually tell people that if they're looking for slug control, even just a half a bushel of rye, just something simple like that can help mitigate those slugs. Other above ground pests, it's really not uncommon. You move to a system where you're increasing diversity because you're planting a cover crop, and maybe you have multi-species mixes in there. You're increasing the diversity of everything. You're increasing the diversity of your cover crop. You're increasing the diversity of the microbial populations. You're increasing the diversity of the above ground pests as well. So it's pretty common, and it's a fun thing to do. You can go out into a soybean field in August and just walk through the field, and I would be willing to bet that you can pick out 15 to 20 different insect species in every single soybean field that you walk into. It's been my experience that the farms that are adopting cover crops tend to have a few more species than the farms that are not adopting cover crops. But pretty consistently 10 to 15 different species. Now, you take all those species and you add them all up and you look at the feeding that's occurring in the plants, it hardly ever exceeds an economic threshold. So even though we're increasing the diversity of our insect populations, we're not necessarily increasing the risk of having to make a post-emerge insect application. And part of the reason for that is the beneficial insects that we have listed here as well. We certainly see an uptick in the beneficial insect populations where people have no-till and cover crops compared to where they don't. This picture here is of a robber fly. We see robber flies, we see lacewings, we see soldier bugs, whole host of beneficial insects. When you think of slugs, and I'm going to bring the conversation back to slugs, we see a lot of wolf spiders, and particularly in early spring when the slugs that overwinter will come out and they'll lay their eggs, and as the eggs kind of mature, they eventually look like an ammonium sulfate fertilizer pellet. And when you see those, ammonium sulfate fertilizer pellets, you know that the slugs are about 10 days away from hatching. And we find that the fields that have higher populations of wolf spiders and some other little critters tend to have less slug populations. So you can go out in early spring, you can start this in April, go out and dig a hole. You're gonna dig a hole probably about, you know, as wide as this, and you're gonna take a 2-liter soda bottle and cut the top off, and then take the top and turn it upside down, stick it inside, and then stick that whole soda bottle right in the soil so that the top of it is right at the soil surface, and cover it back up with dirt as much as you can. And then every day, just stop back out and pull the soda bottle out and look and see what kind of insects you've captured. And you're going to capture 1 million wolf spiders, and you're going to capture a couple of black beetles and some other random things, but I think you'll be amazed the population of wolf spiders that you have in some of your continual no-till fields. And those beneficials all add up, and it helps you kind of manage some of those pests that you're seeing in your fields. And so that leads us into the insecticide and the insecticidal seed treatment conversation. It seems to me that as time goes by, our farms that are on the forefront of adopting soil health practices are eliminating those insecticidal seed treatments from their fields. From an agronomic perspective, and my perspective as somebody who's out there trying to minimize risk on a farm and trying to just make sure that we're driving production as much as I can, my general thought on it is, if you're planting under cold, wet soil conditions that are going to delay germination and have slow emergence, under those situations, you can see yourself spending the money on insecticidal seed treatments as a risk management thing. We're just trying to protect that seed, extra insurance policy, because you planted that corn on April 10th and it's not going to emerge until April 21st. We always have situations like that, particularly on larger farms where they have several hundred or several thousand acres of corn to cover. It can't all be planted in the most ideal situation, so some of it gets planted when it really shouldn't. And we're going to use seed treatments on that first percentage of their corn acres in order to give them some added protection. As you get into optimal planting times, or as you get into some later planting times, we do not see an economic benefit to those seed treatments under most circumstances. Like I said, there's always the random situation that shows up where, yep, should have used a seed treatment there. But the majority of the time, if you have quick germination and quick emergence, we're not seeing the economic advantage to putting those seed treatments in. From an insecticide standpoint, it used to be 20 years ago, when people first started transitioning to no-till, that we would always put a preventative pre-emerge insecticide application with our burn down. You'd use 2 ounces of Warrior, 1.5 ounces of Aethroid, and it was there to control secondary pests, most likely cutworm and stalk borer. We don't want to do that anymore. We've got too much insect diversity, whether it's our beneficials or our wolf spiders or whatever, but we don't want to put those blanket insecticide applications on anymore, because it will kill all of our beneficial critters that are there. So our recommendation is, we don't want to use preventative insecticides for secondary pests. We want people to use insecticidal seed treatments in a targeted fashion where the scenario in which they're planting is added risk. And we really want them taking a hard look at how insecticide use is affecting some of the beneficials that are in furrow. It's always disheartening when you start digging up corn seed in the spring, and for every corn seed that you dig up, you find 2 dead beetles. That happens. That happens more than you think. So as these beetle populations grow and they get into the furrow, the insecticides that we're using are having an impact on their populations. We have a risk taking that insecticide out, but we also have a risk in putting it in. So it's a site-specific, operation-specific decision, but that's one of the decisions that our farms are hiring us to make. They're hiring us to help them make that decision on how, when, and where they should be positioning insecticides to be successful and not have it be a detriment to the system. So Steve, questions I have for you on this, when you're out there walking your fields or talking to other farms, what's your general sense on insecticide use and seed treatments?
I think you laid it out well, that there's being less used the farther you get into a healthy system. And that's just maybe suffice as it is to say for the sake of time here. I certainly agree with what you said. I will recommend that if people are just starting to use cover crops, basically are coming from maybe call it an unhealthy system or it's early, don't just go cold turkey on cutting out your insecticides. Know what you're doing. As you get into healthier soil, you don't need them as much, if at all.
Insects are one of those things where it's really easy to show a farmer. You can take pictures, you can text them pictures. We do this a lot late summer where we're just taking as many pictures as we can of insects, which, by the way, really helps for putting together PowerPoint presentations. But we're always taking pictures and texting them to our customers to let them know what's out there and just trying to educate them. The insect management in a soil health system, it's a short-term payback. We're eliminating a cost in a healthy system. So that's a short-term payback that we can talk to customers about and make sure that they're understanding that if we're going to adopt cover crops and spend money on the cover crops, here's how we get that money back. Part of it is insect management. Other part is weed management. We definitely find that farmers that are adopting cover crops have less weed competition. Cover crops are a mode of action. When we're putting together herbicide programs for our farmers, like I said, we want 5 to 6 modes of action, chemical, herbicide modes of action present in their system or in their rotation for effective weed control. Cover crops are a mode of action. They're just as effective as a herbicide that you would apply. So definitely want people to be aware of that as they're moving forward with cover crops and more years of cover crops, they should be able to kind of pare back that overall herbicide applications that they're making. We don't want them paring back the modes of action, but we're going to go from a high rate or a medium rate of a product down to a low rate of a product. And so far we've had some fairly good success with that. The other thing I would point out is just don't look ahead or look ahead and make sure that you're not using herbicides that are going to have a negative impact on the cover crops that you want to plant. If all you want to do is plant small grains as your cover crop, you're really not going to have that many problems. But if you start making the decision that I'm going to try to put clovers in, I'm going to try to put canola or rape or some other mustards, we really need to take a hard look at the herbicides that we're using and how we're positioning those herbicides so that they're not having a negative impact on that cover crop when you're planting it. Weed management, very easy to show a farmer because you can go back and you can say, look at the herbicides that you used and here's the cost of that. And we reduced rates, or this is how we modified things based off of what you used to do. And that's a short-term payback. So that's another way that if a farmer is going to invest in a cover crop, we can get that money back in a very short-term period. So Steve, thoughts on that?
I think you well covered. I'll just say, for the sake of time, we probably should keep marching on here. Well covered there.
Yep. Disease management. I'm gonna say disease management's a long-term payback. You got to figure anybody who's doing cover crop, we are making our soil temperatures colder when we plant, and that can lead to some early season diseases. What I want people to understand is make sure we have the right variety chosen, particularly corn and soybeans. We've got to have strong disease packages in these hybrids in order for them to withstand some of the disease pressure that we see in fields. And that's just risk management, and that's just making sure that we're making decisions that set that crop up for success. Same way with late season disease. I don't think we see an increase in disease pressure because people plant cover crops for late season. The way that diseases move into the field, it just doesn't lend itself to cover crops being a factor in how that happens. But certainly want people to be aware of late season disease and make sure that they're scouting for it so that they're understanding what's going on in the fields. And then fertility management. I don't know if you know this, but cover crops uptake nutrients. Newsflash, it's good and bad, right? It's great because you're going to put that cover crop out there. It's going to increase nitrogen retention from your fall and winter applied manure. You're going to capture that underutilized soil nitrogen. The bad part of it is we really have no idea when you're going to get those nutrients back. You're going to get them back in 60 days, 90 days, 120 days. So all we want people to be aware of is that we want to adjust that base fertility to account for that and make sure that we've got something in that fertility plan to account for immobilization, which can happen when the carbon to nitrogen ratios of your cover crop get above 20. We're probably going to see some immobilization. Just make sure that we have a fertility plan in place that's going to help address that. So both the short-term payback from the retention of manure nutrients, from that capturing of underutilized soil nitrates, but also a long-term payback depending on how fast that residue cycles nutrients back to you. Organic matter is always an interesting one. It's a very long-term payback. I don't think there's a whole lot I'm going to add to that you probably don't already know, other than organic matter levels change very, very slowly over time. The best way that we can do that is just track organic matter levels in our soil tests. This is one of our customers and how his organic matter levels have changed over the past 10 years. It's been a very slow road for customers to improve organic matter, and most of that's because of rotation and how they're using or not using cover crops on their farm. And finally, nitrogen cycling. Nitrogen cycling is highly variable, and it can definitely be a short-term payback for farms depending on how they're using cover crops. I really feel like in order for nitrogen cycling to be a short-term payback, we have to have better tools for calculating the contribution of nitrogen to our system, whether we're talking about manure application or whether we're talking about legume contributions or whether we're talking about soil organic matter mineralization. There's just a lot of variability in our fields. If you took, the average organic matter, even if you took the organic matter level on this farm here, it's just shy of 3%. You do the calculation on that with an average mineralization rate, he should have 90 pounds of nitrogen to his corn crop from his organic matter. We really don't calculate that in any of our nutrient management plans because it's highly variable. We don't know when that 90 pounds is going to become available versus when our crop is going to need it. So there's a lot of opportunity in our soil health conversations to figure out and try to calculate nitrogen contributions to soil health. So that's a big thing that we work on, is trying to just make sure our rate of nitrogen is right. And the final thing I'm going to leave you with today is just talking about some overall fertility strategies. I don't think I need to tell you how important soil testing is in a fertility management strategy. Soil testing is super important. We want to make sure that we're soil testing at least every 2 years. Think of it holistically. The amount of boron in a soil will affect how a plant utilizes nitrogen. The amount of sulfur in soil will affect how a plant utilizes nitrogen. If our magnesium levels are low, we're not going to get the phosphorus removal that we want because our yields are going to be suppressed. So everything is connected when it comes to fertility. Make sure that when you're talking to farmers that they are doing what they need to manage their crop for fertility. So like I said, we do soil tests every 2 years. In the spring, we can go in and do nitrate samples. We do a lot of plant tissue sampling in order to target micronutrients and just get those ratios right. And when you factor in cover crops into a fertilization strategy, it can have a very short-term payback. We usually find that all of the nutrients that a cover crop will uptake through its growth period gets released back to our cash crop within the first 60 days. So if you have roots that are going down 5 feet and capturing some sulfur and bringing that sulfur up to the top, within 90 days of termination, that sulfur should be available to your cash crop. But you figure that out by doing in-season testing and working with your farmers to identify what's being captured and what the release rates are. So that's work that each of us can go out on the farms and do. So I probably went over on my time, Steve, but I'll kick it back to you.
Well, good stuff. I appreciate that, Eric. It's always good to hear your perspective as a crop advisor, and I appreciate what you're doing in that. So I'm going to turn it back to Lamont right quick. I don't know if you want to put a poll or ask a few questions right now.
Yeah, let's get to a few questions because some of them pertain directly to what Eric was talking about. There's one though that I want to make sure we cover, and that is one comment that we can turn into a question, and that is half rates causing herbicide resistance. Half rate herbicide application causing resistance. Any thoughts on that? Either of you?
Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, half rates in itself will not cause herbicide resistance. Herbicide resistance is a natural mutation that occurs in the plant. So you have, I always explain it to my customers, we have 3 or 4 different eye colors. You know, we can have brown eyes, we can have blue eyes, green eyes, whatever. Pigweed has 10,000 combinations for eyes, and one of them is Roundup resistance. And you have that random genetic mutation that occurs in a field where the only thing you're using is Roundup, and sure enough, we have a resistant population that is born. So once you have that genetic mutation that occurs, it's just making sure that we have enough chemistry and effective strategies in place. And simply using a half rate of herbicide is not going to do anything to trigger that genetic mutation. I guess the other thing I would say on that, Lamont, is genetic mutations for resistance are not all or nothing. You can have a mutation that makes a plant 30% resistant to a herbicide. You can have a mutation that makes it 60% resistant to a herbicide, or you can have one that makes it 100%. And so if you have a mutation that gives it partial resistance, then yes, a reduced rate of herbicide could have an influence on that, but it would be very rare for our customer base to use a reduced rate of herbicide and not follow that up with something post-emerge. So if you're going to use a reduced rate of herbicide, and generally we're using a reduced rate of herbicide in our pre-emerge program, we're following that up with a post-emerge application that's going to clean up anything that escapes.
Thank you. Steve, anything to add to that, or should we move on? Okay.
Yep.
And I'm going to try and focus on the questions that have had the upvotes. We have a number of questions that have at least 4 or 5 people that are asking the same questions. So those of you out in the audience, definitely use that upvote feature to prioritize some of the questions that you also think are important. So here's one. When you plant green, are there any advantages to seeding your cash crop at 30 or 45 degree rows to your cover crop? I've heard that this can increase the cross community of the microbiology between the cover crop to the cash crop. Would there be hairpinning issues with this seeding pattern?
There's a lot there.
I know, where do we start?
Well, I would say that the majority of the people that we work with, their field sizes are not allowing them to plant on any kind of degree off center to the row. We just have smaller field sizes here in the East compared to some other areas. And I think the success of planting green is, from my experience, it's related to our seeding rates of our cover crop. The more biomass we have there, the harder it is to get that seed in the ground. And it's related to the technology of our planter. If you're going to go out and plant green into 25 tons of biomass with your 1995 John Deere corn planter, you're probably going to have problems. But if you're going out into 4 tons of biomass with a planter that has automatic down pressure, you're going to have really good success. So I think it's a combination of equipment and how you're setting your cover crop up.
Yeah. Steve, a question for you left over from yesterday. And you mentioned a different root size of new versus old varieties of wheat. And this person wonders if you have any specific sources where one could look for that.
Yeah, I would have to get back to you and see if I get a picture of that. I'm going to have to dig pretty deep in my archives. And I might have to, I don't think, I did not take a picture of it, unfortunately. I know who to talk to.
Right.
So I'll see what I can do in that.
Okay. And a number of you were interested in that. So Jen, maybe we can find a way to get that information out to the whole group.
Mm-hmm.
We had a question from Central Alberta. Okay. And it's a long one. Let me just read it quickly. What do you think would be enough of a growing time for cover crops? The only crops that are harvested in August in Central Alberta are peas and maybe early barley. If I can't get my winter wheat in the ground by September 1st, it won't get established. Usually in early October, we will get the first snow.
Well, I've been up there, I've been to Peace River Valley, which may be north of where this is coming from. And yeah, you're really sure. Now, the good thing about it though, is if you don't live there, you might not know this, but they have like 18-hour days of sun. And it's amazing what can grow in that kind of geography, the location. So even if you just have 3 or 4 weeks, a cover crop like sorghum Sudan that really would go well with a lot of light would be an option. That's my answer. If you have a 4-week window, I think it would be an option. So I'll probably just leave it at that. Again,
Right.
Talk to some people up there. I know Scott Gillespie is down there in Calgary. You know that name, look him up. Kevin Elmy's over in Saskatchewan. I've mentioned his name a couple times for those of you up north. They're good people that work more closely with this than I do and might have actually better answers, but that's.
Right. And per your point yesterday about $1 per inch of rain,
Yeah.
they get 12 to 15 inches up there.
There you go. Well, I'll tell you, the simple thing is with dry land areas like that is it's easy. It's not about getting cheaper seed. You just lower your rates. Don't cut your seeding rates. I've been to Australia where the average rainfall in this one guy's farm in Adelaide, Australia is 12 to 15 inches a year. He told me, I want to be the driest dryland farmer in the world that uses cover crops. And that's the can-do attitude that'll make it work. But, I was there, and honestly, if you look at his cover crop fields, they look pathetic from our standards. But he's only planting a couple pounds of cover crop because that's a management factor to do that.
For either of you, how beneficial are pollinator strips? Would they pay to increase pollination on peas or canola or provide habitat for predator insects? If they do, how close or how far apart should they be?
That's a whole seminar right there. And I'll try to condense it to a minute. My thing in Pennsylvania, a lot of us have woods. And the 30 feet around a woods is you lose money on that if you're farming. I'll guarantee you lose money. Why not plant pollinator strips around your woods, at your field edges, along a fence row? To me, that's the quickest answer. As far as
because of shade, you're saying, because of shade effect.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
So why not put them there? That to me is the easiest answer to that. There are places in wide open country that are actually looking at planting pollinator strips right down through the middle of vast expanses, 1,000 acres, and stuff like that. And they're starting to think they see results. This is very difficult to quantify. I'm a fan of it. What I've been doing more in my farm here, in my pumpkin fields, I make the driveways a pollinator strip. I can show you pictures of it. And to me, I don't get many pumpkins out of my driveway because we have to go through those driveways throughout the season sometimes. I'm spraying less now, but I still got to get through. Why not plant a pollinator strip there? Of course, for pumpkins, it's obvious, to provide the beneficials and bees and all that. But
hey, Eric, anything to add on that?
No, I like the idea of taking the areas that are right next to woodland. More and more our customers that have yield monitors, you take that yield monitor information and you overlay economics on it, and we are losing a lot of money, those areas that are right along woodland. So, farmers then want to go and either cut down the trees or figure out some way to mitigate that loss. And pollinator habitat, particularly one that you could do through an equip contract, is a great way to get some positive revenue on those small areas.
What cover crop species or other criteria would be appropriate for a 15-inch row versus 7.5?
I wouldn't get too hung up over that. Frankly, I've thought about this, but I've never come to, well, this is what you should or shouldn't do. That's my quick answer.
Million Acre Challenge has 2 questions for you, Eric. Are farmers you work with showing interest in or use of multi-species cover crop mixes? And secondly, non-chemical termination options.
I think as time goes by, we're slowly seeing more multi-species cover crop mixes. One of the limiting factors we have to that with my client base is the planting date of cover crops. We don't get planting until, mid-October, late October into November. And so we're limited a lot on what species we can put in there. So you see more small grain mixes where people will do a little bit of barley, a little bit of wheat, a little bit of rye. And maybe they'll put one non-grass species in there, like a canola or some kind of a radish or something. But we're not really seeing tremendous adoption of multi-species cover crops yet. And then the non-chemical termination options, we're not seeing a whole lot of that either. We do know that the rollers are out there, and we've seen them demoed. It's certainly fun technology, but our customer base, at least, I think before they would look to do rollers, they would probably look to do more planting green with total post-emerge herbicide applications for the termination.
Right. And Steve, just to follow up on that real quick, because I know you tried also, and you continue to do some non-chemical termination, but what would you say is the single biggest challenge for getting good termination with just the roller?
Well, timing it to when the cover crop is mature to do that effectively versus when you need to plant your cash crop. And sometimes you just run out of time. So it just doesn't work. I like to say this, a little bit of herbicide goes a long way when rolling cover crops.
Question, and maybe, well, either of you, are either familiar with Penn State's Larson Farm combination roller, crimper, and seeding the crop on the back end? Great idea if termination of the cover crop is managed properly. So related question, and sounds like there's that particular equipment that Penn State uses.
I'm not aware of that, I guess, as it was described.
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen that one. We have one or two customers that have started to put rollers on the front of their corn planters, where you have individual rollers on the row unit. So we see a little bit of that, but I'm not familiar with that particular one.
So maybe the last question for now, what are your thoughts on planting vetch or balanza clover in the fall following soybeans, then plant spring oats or barley into it the following spring? Nitrogen availability to the oats and barley. Should I ask that again?
No, I got it. I'm trying to figure out why you would do that. 2 planting passes, you could, I understand that oats would winter kill probably if you would plant it. Don't really quite understand the rationale of that. Maybe there's something I'm not aware of.
Yeah, so maybe that person just maybe put a follow-up statement in the Q&A, just refine your question a bit more and we can circle back to it. But great questions, folks, and we'll have some more time for that. So Steve, you would be stepping up next with a presentation, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Could I just do a poll real quick?
Yes, sir.
Before you get started. Okay. So if you've been following us this week, we do an occasional poll just to see where your thoughts are at or what your context is. And this poll that I'm going to launch this morning is really targeted to ag consultants, CCAs, folks that have farmers as clients. But I would also certainly include district people, NRCS people in this too. But what we're trying to get at here is, are there particular strengths within your organization or business that you feel you'd really be comfortable providing specific services to farmers? So let me launch this right now. Okay, so why don't you get started on that, and we'll leave it up for a bit. And Steve, I think you can get started as people are looking at this. It may take them a little bit to put their brains around this. This is going to take a bit longer than the other polls we had put up.
Yeah, so what, are you just gonna take the poll when you're done, or you want to just interrupt me at that point, or?
I will probably give the results later in the
Okay.
next hour.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Well, okay, I appreciate this is our last day today. I would say I hope your internet speed's doing well, because I'm going to show you a bunch of videos and so forth. There's just nothing like a video to see some of this. And I'm going to get right into it here. And we're going to start right out with planting green. We talked about that quite a bit here. Eric did. Planting green is anything, I say, where the crop is literally growing or green. It could be 6 inches tall. It could be 6 feet tall. This is a little scary for most of you, and I don't recommend you start here unless you've got a lot of information, you got your planter ready, and so forth. Some people have kind of been backed into planting green simply because it was too wet. They just couldn't plant, couldn't terminate. And here they are, they got a mess. Usually when I get calls from farmers say, my rye is about 4 feet tall. What do I do? And I say, relax, just relax. Make sure your planter can go through that. There's an obvious places where it can catch. Are you gonna roll? You're not gonna roll. But the biggest warning I give is do not kill that cover crop until you know that you can plant it before the next rain. Because if you go in and spray and you get an inch or two of rain, it's just not going to dry out. Trust me, that you don't want that to happen. Then people are going to blame the cover crop, where it was really their management here. Now, this can be worked the other way, where you can actually help suck up the water. And so that's kind of the intention of all this. Here's just an example of it. This is Ben Peckman out there in Franklin County, South Central Pennsylvania. This is a corn planter with those rollers right on the planter. Eric just referenced that. The idea here is it's a low-lying field. He grows out the moisture in the spring, plants, and then in August when it gets dry, you got that nice residue underneath that corn canopy to hold the moisture at that point. So this is what we're talking about. We're planting green. This is like serious planting green here. Don't start this maybe the first year unless you have a good amount of instruction and education. Close up of how those rollers look. They're small, and they can be small because you're driving very slow. These have been tested and approved. They were invented by our in Pennsylvania farmer, Charlie Martin, and now Dawn Equipment sells them. And there's several other companies have similar devices out there. You know, it is definitely something that is slowly gaining ground for some farmers. So why do we plant green? Well, we want to maximize N production. If we have legumes, if we're able to do that, maximize the biomass production, maximize the amount of the life in the soil. Basically, we're maximizing everything cover crops do. But you got to understand, you got to know what you're doing. You got to have the proper equipment. And that's, Eric referenced that. How do you adjust your row cleaner? Hey, it depends on what the soil temperature is. Not the calendar date. It depends what the soil temperature is. I carry a soil thermometer. It's either in I got a couple of them. It's either in the tractor or in my pocket. I just want to know what that soil temperature is, and I want to know what the 5-day weather forecast is. Those two things, current soil temperature, 5-day weather forecast, determines how aggressive you get on your row cleaners. I want to leave as much there as possible. And again, this is a planter that's properly set up. Some of your planters, you don't have this luxury, and you know, for whatever reason, you gotta, you know, want to clean the rows so you can actually get the cover crop cut. So, and we're going to talk about hairpinning in a second. You know, having down pressure like air or hydraulic down pressures is really important for making this work. Having non-wrapping row cleaners, plenty of them out there in the market now, a kind of a swept back design. This is the Getter Tiger Shark Tooth. In behind there, you can't really see it, but there's a deflector to deflect out even cover crops. Even those little treader wheels, there's aluminum treader wheels, are actually designed in softer conditions so they don't gouge into the soil, but they actually help push the cover crop away a little bit more. That's the reason they're on this planter. So your row cleaner adjustments can even ultimately affect how your row closes. And row cleaner adjustments are, you know, there is no correct setting all around. The correct setting is more of trying to match the conditions that you have. Earlier on, you're planting green, you might want to open that row up so the sun can in there, warm up the seed row, get those plants up out of the ground. Later on, as the temperature goes up, you got good weather ahead, plant your seed deeper, don't move as much away. That's the general rule of thumb in that. Hairpinning can be a problem. And one of the little tricks I got, I should have put that picture in. I carry a trowel, like a garden trowel, in the planter, in the tractor, because when you're planting into green growing cover crops, you have a thatch of roots in there. And if you just have like a seed finder, like you see there in that picture, sometimes it's hard to dig down in there and actually find the seed. What I like to do is go along the side of the seed trench and peel away the soil so you can clearly see. And if you see a lot of this, like you see here, see that seed there right next to that, you see the seed right next to the, see if I can get my little penny thing working here. You know, right next to that, the what's hairpin there, that can dry out, wick it out. That seed may not germinate right away, might wait till it rains and it's 4 or 5 days behind or a week behind. It's become a weed at that point. So that's why you want to eliminate that. You want to eliminate hairpinning. That's like Eric so eloquently said, a lot of the problems happen with the planter to make this work. Sometimes we can get away with planting a little deeper in order to get less hairpinning, because it's actually by the discs or the coulter, if you have coulters, cutting deeper can actually cut the residue much better. Farmers have been planting a little deeper here lately, and this is part of the reason. Part of the reason is I think we have better genetics, and this bodes well with this whole concept. I would say once you get into, again, I'm not going to mention a calendar date, but once your planting depth is 55 degrees or warmer, you can sink it down up to 2.5 inches, 3 inches if you're brave. It's amazing how much of a better stand you'll get, especially if their temperatures are starting to get warmer, probably toward the end of your planting system. Back at the back end of the planter, there's 24 different types of closing wheels you can get these days. It's very important, though, knowing what your conditions are and what you may expect. These are some Pro Stitch closing wheels here that really make it much easier to close the slot because of their design, but they also can wrap much easier as well. And that's a concern you might have. We're going to address that in a second. But just looking down, this is straight, looking right down into the row, you can see how those spokes kind of push the soil back together. And it's difficult to close the seed slot because of the root mass that's in there. And this is a key area where a lot of farmers don't do the proper adjustments. I literally had a guy contact me one day. He said, I can't get the seed slot closed. It was his first experience of no-till. And I said, well, where is your setting on the pressure adjustment on your seed closing wheels? And he said, I don't know. And I said, have you ever changed the setting on your closing wheels? He goes, I never have. And I was really surprised actually to hear that. But you have to, there's settings back there. There's a reason for that. But, you know, I said, well, why don't you go back and set it a little harder and maybe see if that does the job. So sometimes, you know, sometimes people just aren't thinking about those few simple things. So you've got to be gracious with that, but important to get the row closed. Now, this is literally about 5 years ago now. I saw this adjustable angle closing wheel in France. Now, this is those of you who know planters, this is a Monastery Planner, which is actually a popular planner in France because that's where it's made. And I saw this adjustment. I thought, duh, why didn't we have this before? You see, our planters are pretty much designed, the closing wheels are pretty much designed off of the John Deere 7000 when they came out in the 1970s. In that technology, which was to close a tilled soil, to pack the soil around the seed and leave it nice and mellow so the seed could just grow up through there. That design, that angle on those closing wheels hasn't changed since the 70s. 50-year-old technology hasn't changed. why don't we have adjustable angle closing wheels? Because that would solve a lot of these problems. Here's a closer up of another version of that. And it's just like, this is actually in South Africa. I saw this. And I started getting a little bit frustrated. I think, you know, why don't we have this in the United States? Now this is 2 years ago now, but lo and behold, I was even more frustrated when I found the John Deere planter that actually had this on. But I found out, I said, where is this John Deere planter made? I never saw this before in John Deere. And they said, well, it comes from Brazil. Why don't we have it? And here's the John Deere planter. You can just see how this works here. So this, to me, will greatly eliminate some of the problems, particularly in seed closure. Now you can almost go back to your smooth wheels because it requires very little down pressure. So I started harping on this. By the way, I saw all kinds of these. I have a collection here. I'm up to about a dozen planters around the world that have this technology on the tail end. And we still haven't seen any major manufacturers in the US do it. Now, Yetter, who we're all familiar with, they make aftermarket planter parts. They started designing a piece to do this. And here's how it looks. This is, they sent me one to try as a test. I was one of 100 rows that they sent me in 2019. And this is how it looks, the model that Yetter has. And I put it on my planter. And this is actually planting pumpkins. And I'm just showing this video to show you kind of how it works, but look at where the tension is there, that T-bar up there. It's on the lightest setting, and that's very heavy cover crops. So we kind of this is where technology is coming here. And I think you're fairly soon going to see this come out in almost all the planters that are being made. To me, it's just a simple design that just makes things so much easier. I wanted to show you too, you know, around the world here. This is the coolest no-till drill I have ever seen. This is Argentina. And I just wanted to show it to you because we continue to evolve in equipment. There's been a little bit of a lag, I feel, I think machinery manufacturers are now stepping up. They see more no-till, more use of cover crops. And I'm not going to go into the details here of this planter, but they plan everything with that planter's all in one. They can lift those units up to, it was like set up on basically 10-inch. Now it was a metric system, but I'll just keep it easy, 10-inch settings. So you could plant like 30-inch corn, you could plant 10-inch soybeans, 10-inch cover crops, all precision planted, all singulated seeds, and all very good row depth controls. So that was one of the most sophisticated dual purpose planters I've ever seen. And I was very impressed to see how that works. Now, I mentioned planting soybeans into hairy vetch. I'm just going to share some things that sometimes our theories don't turn out to be correct. I went to Argentina to talk about cover crops. And of course, what are we going to say for soybeans? You always plant cereal rye in front of soybeans because we know that it helps in weed control and soybeans grow very well. Why would you use a legume in front of a legume? Why would you use hairy vetch before soybeans? Well, I started asking these questions and they said, well, we get a little higher yield, but mainly they get higher protein. And that does make sense because nitrogen here in the form of a legume can help boost protein levels. So in Argentina, in this case, they get docked if their protein levels are below, I think it's 37%, which isn't that high, but they get docked at the elevator if that occurs. So they are using this technique to increase protein levels because it's part of the way payment is. It's more than just yield. And I just came away, you know, thinking, wow, that's interesting. I have now talked to a couple soybean growers, they're using cover crops, who verified this. That they said adding a legume to cereal rye can actually boost yields a little bit. I also know that some soybean farmers are actually putting some nitrogen on their beans. I would much rather get that effect by doing it this way. So I'm putting it out there. This is kind of the advanced type things that I learn about as I travel. For some of you or some of your people, you might want to suggest this, to try it. let's see if it works in the Mid-Atlantic. I think there's a shot at it maybe working, but it's just kind of interesting. Now I want to go through kind of my mindset here of how I design a cover crop. And I'm going to use corn. I know that Eric said that not too many people are using mixes, but there is a trend that way. If you look at this, the plants here, you can see the radishes, you see a hairy vetch plant, there's some oats, and there's actually some triticale, and there's some peas in there. And this is designed for corn. And I'm going to go through here a series of slides where you can see this field. All these pictures are taken from the same field. This picture here is now late February. We've come through the winter, just not really greening up yet. You see the radishes are dead. The oats is dead. Little triticale starting to come to life. You look really close, you can find some vetch and some peas. Now we look at right about planting time. Now you can see what survived the winter, what's growing. It looks really nice. And basically, I'm growing corn, so I'm leaning a little heavier in legumes here at this time because I want to provide nitrogen for my corn to grow. We come planting time, I roll it down, I put a little bit of herbicide on as a burn down. In this case, a half pint of 2,4-D and a pint of glyphosate. I know that's a low rate, but this is getting rolled. This is planted now around May the 12th, May the 15th. You saw where they were blooming back there. For my area, that's about the time of the calendar where we're at. One of the things here is I try not to use I try not to use residuals, and I try to rely more on post-emergence because then there's a lot of good ones out there. So I'm trying to use the cover crop as my initial herbicide, if you will, my mode of action. I like the way you said that, Eric. And then I'll come back with post if I need to. This is how it looked at harvest in that same field. We still have coverage. The soil is still covered. I still want my soil covered even at harvest time with actual residues I'm not going to count the canopy of the corn as soil being covered. I still want that, so that's why I have that triticale growing in that mix. So this is just a run through of what works good on my farm. And I'm not saying I use that recipe every year, but it's the theory behind it, the principle behind it that makes it work. So remember I said the other day how, you're not trying hard enough if you never have failures. Well, I just heard it stated that you never have failures, but you have outcomes that you did not expect. How do you like that one? It's kind of nicer, actually, because here, Steve Groff gets this great idea. Why not use my 15-inch planter and put sun hemp in the 15-inch rows and plant corn on the alternating 15-inch rows? It'll grow together, and sun hemp can mature, and it's very fibrous, and for sure that's going to pull right down through the stalk rolls or the snapping rolls. That's not going to be a problem. Can I get away with no nitrogen fertilizer? Is this worth it? Well, what I didn't calculate is no matter how I ran that combine, the speed of the rolls, speed of the combine, ground speed, all that, like 90% of the sun hemp went through the combine. And my little old combine's not designed to take that amount of green material through the combine. So I ended up harvesting that one row at a time. But here's what you got to know. Don't pity me. It was only 2 acres. It was an outcome I did not expect and haven't tried since. Just saying. So some of the things, don't be afraid to try, but be careful. Don't try it too much. You might get in trouble. Well, this is a little bit more tangible here. This is now we're looking at alternate methods of weed control. We talked about resistant weeds. We're going to talk about that more. This is a case for a farmer with organic 30-inch row soybeans planted into rolled down cereal rye. Still a few weeds there, but that actually doesn't look bad. So again, coming back to Charles Martin, the guy who invented the roller, he actually made this row mow, or whatever you want to call it, that can get through the rows in 30-inch rows. And there's actually rotating blades in there that come off a New Holland disc miller. So that's what it is. And he has the hydraulic motors you can see there. One of the things nice about this is when you come to the end, usually the 3-point hitch doesn't lift high enough that you don't clip off a taller growing crop. So this is actually have cylinders in it to lift it higher so at end rows you're not clipping off your crop. And I got this unit to try, so here you can kind of see exactly what I'm talking about. Now this is a picture taken early in the spring, but you get a little bit of a view of it. This is where it might appeal to some organic farmers. There could be a few more tweaks to this yet, but there you can see how they lift up totally out of the way. And this is some of the new things that are being developed just for weed control in this context. The problem with this, though, is it's not going to get anything in the row. So there's always a few weeds in the row. But nonetheless, this may appeal to some people in doing something like this. I recognize there's not a lot of vegetable farmers or vegetable clients on here. I just wanted to show you that these techniques and principles are being applied in a broad area, even in vegetable production. This is becoming very popular in southeastern Pennsylvania. This is literally right beside the Loyola produce auction, the first and biggest produce auction in the nation. Just to tell you how popular this is. We're relating plastic in the fall and immediately broadcasting cereal rye. And usually in the fall, it's almost guaranteed that that's going to grow. It is on tilled soil, so the seed to soil contact is very good. There's, especially if you're farming up and down hills, you know, you can actually get away with a little bit of this now through using cover crops in a plastic culture situation. Now this is back to that original slide I showed you at the produce auction. I drove by there right after they planted cantaloupes. I happened to be in the area later on the summer. Look at that. Isn't that nice? The nice thing about it here is beyond just keeping the soil in place, it's the cantaloupes are cleaner. So there's a market value to this. There's an added value to doing this. I was just over this way here yesterday afternoon. I had to make a trip over that way after the webinar. And I frankly was surprised how many fields I saw that have cover crops in where the plastic is laid for vegetables. So it's definitely catching on here. What if you don't get it done in the fall? Here's an example in the spring. You're using spring oats instead. And the other thing too, if you're growing something like squash, you can come in with a post-emergence grass type herbicide and spray over there and terminate that cover crop. You want to let that grow long enough so that it hangs around so that the biomass is there supporting your pumpkins, your squash, whatever it may be, to keep the fruit a lot cleaner. Now, we've even taken this up to another level, which actually, it's fun for me to see innovation that I had no part of, or didn't even know about. Here is a roller designed to roll taller cover crops between plastic with a shielded sprayer. So we're rolling down the cover crop, and then the sprayer is shielded so it doesn't hurt the cash crop. And a little closer picture of the roller. That looks to me like it's like the feeder rollers for a corn chopper. I think that may be what it is. I didn't ask them, but anyway, this is the result here. It doesn't look perfect, but there again, it was a little early when it is. The rolling part didn't really keep it down, but you can see there was protected the herbicide there. And now this is the latest version of this. Here's a brand new one. They're making these things brand new. So vegetable farmers are doing this. Really cool to see this technology develop in the vegetable industry. I want to address some challenges. If you are planting green, in whatever fashion it is, you don't want it to blow down. This means it starts in the fall, the way you plant it, the seeding rate, the fertility you have, manure application, all that stuff. Always would recommend that you keep your seeding rates on the lower side rather than the higher side, at least to start, so this doesn't occur. Because if your planter's not set up right, you'll have what you see there on the right. You see that little squash seed that didn't germinate? The row wasn't cut. This is a classic example, hairpinning. The picture on the left was taken literally 3 feet away, so with one that was properly placed in the soil. So that picture was taken at the same time. So, but the difference was the one was cut cleanly, the other wasn't. Well, we have some tools now to help with that. One of the things, and strategically, is to roll your cover crop before it blows down. And if you have hairy vetch, particularly in with the triticale, like is shown here, that gets heavy on the triticale. And when you get a rainstorm or a rain event, it's easier to blow down. I want to back up here, and I want you to see this when I click on it, that there's a storm rolling in. It's a little hard to see, but there's dark clouds back there. This is literally, we were rolling as fast as we could, because at that stage, I didn't want the cover crop to blow down every which way. I wanted to have it rolled in a direction that I wanted to plant. This is why I like to roll when it's time to roll. I like to plant when it's time to plant. And because a lot of my crops are vegetables, we're planting, you know, from the middle of May through the end of June. So, you know, I want to get it rolled down to the main stems. Here is actually, this was a Sunday night. They were saying that there's storms coming through over the night. I started at 11 p.m. I saw the radar, it was like a red stripe, you know. You knew that we were going to get, you know, probably a cloud burst and a lot of wind. I was racing before the storm hit the 2 a.m. I rolled as fast as I could for 3 hours in the middle of the night. This is management. Get it rolled down so you can plan into it easier. It doesn't always work all the time, but again, it comes back to that management thing. Now, we do have some tools here that have been developed that can help with this. That can help slice residue. This is from Peckway Planter. Some of you are familiar with them in Lancaster County. They made this design at the request from the Rodale Institute to be able to do no-till organic, to be able to plant through heavy covers, even that blew down. So the direction of the arrow down there is the direction it goes. I'm going to show you the video in a second. So what you see in the black gauge wheel is actually the leading part of this. It holds the cover crop in place, and then that straight bladed disc cuts down through. So it holds it in place so it doesn't push down through. Now here's a video of it working. It's very impressive how well it does. I literally planted across the end of a field with the grain going the opposite way, as you see there, I should say the grain of the cover crop to into the main part of the field there. So this is a tool that is really effective doing this. This is particularly useful for those who are no-tilling pumpkins and squash and that so forth. I don't know a lot of people who have this type of a tool on their corn or soybean planters. So I just wanted to mention that. You see, it's important to get the proper seed to soil contact. Again, harkening back to what Eric said, most of the issues happen in the planter. And here's just a classic example of that. I guess I mentioned before, it all starts the fall before, but Eric, do you have any comments in this planting green thing? What are you seeing with what are some of the challenges that you see? You know, what's some comments there that you see based on what I just shared?
I think the things you had described were wonderful. The one thing I would add to that was just people that are putting fertilizer on with the planter. Make sure that you terminate your cover crop before it starts to suck up all that fertilizer. We do see that from time to time, the people that terminate it late. And then if you're dealing with heavy cover crop that has a high carbon to nitrogen ratio, just make sure you are putting some nitrogen on to help the crop overcome some of that.
Well, yep, especially with corn, you got to have nitrogen right there at the seed. If you have legumes in, not as important in that regard. So, you know, you really get set up the fall before, and then having a proper planter is important. So, you know, how do we manage this cover crop? The proper seeding rate, I talked about that, but you can have a proper seeding rate suggested by a seed salesman, but it really, what's the fertility in that field? What's the planting date? That's factoring in there, and you're going to have to figure this out. And this is where experience comes into play. So either an agronomist who has a little experience in your area, your soils, is helpful, but always err on the side of a little lower seeding rate than higher, unless you're using forage, which is kind of a different category here today. As far as the species and the mix options and the legume to grass ratio, again, we could talk an hour on that, but that'll all affect the fertility needs. It affects a lot. Just coming down to the seeding rate and all that stuff is something you need to carefully think about. But I do put up a few here. This is just to get you started. This is ballpark. You can go up or down from these seeding rates. I have them listed here. I'm not going to read them all to you. So we have our core ones there on the left-hand side. Some popular mixes that are out there, popular seeding rates. and also a few that I like to call these the salt and pepper of a mix, radishes and even oilseed rape. I usually run radishes up to about the 1st of October, then we switch to oilseed rape. That's the brassica of choice. So, you know, just some ideas up there in your mix. And again, as far as if you're thinking about fertility, again, the field history comes in just like everything else. And again, the species of the cover crop, if you're going to plant corn, you got to have nitrogen right there at that corn when you plant. There's nothing there. There's zero available nitrogen. That doesn't mean there's not 100 pounds in that soil. It's just not available because the rye or the triticale took it all up, or annual ryegrass. On the flip side, if you have hairy vetch, crimson clover, peas, if you don't need anything up front, you're going to need some more later on, though, or depends how far into your system, maybe not much at all if you got manure and everything. So adjust as needed. There's kind of a little caveat down there that you need to think about. We talked about weed control. Again, some of the same things. What's the field history? Just don't take your weediest field and try this. Unless you're, I don't know. I don't recommend that. You know, try a cleaner field at first, because your weed control is now the biomass, the consistency of the cover crop, drilling your cover crop in at the right mix, and getting a consistent stand. That's so important if you want some weed control benefits. We got lots of different herbicide options. I'm not going to go into that. That's pretty much, you guys know that. But how you manage that and everything is you know, it's important to follow kind of the rules of the game. This to me is a nice mix. It's not too thick. It's not too thin. We got a lot of species represented there. I'm a big fan of mixes, by the way. And you don't have to have 12. I like to get 4 to 6 in there until we get down to later in the fall. Till we get in October, then we're pretty much wound down to cereal rye. But if you ever get a chance, let's say for whatever reason you take silage off early, or you take grain corn off early, or you plant a shorter season grain, either beans or corn, which I'd recommend on a few acres, get some legumes in there. That's your chance to do that. Set yourself up for maximizing the potential benefits of a cover crop. I got to put this side in because it's pretty. There's some crimson clover, and it's just, isn't that awesome? And it's fun. I love to roll. I kind of miss, my son does most of it now, but it's just a fun thing to do. And it is quite a jolt when you find an unknown groundhog hole at 10 mile an hour. Well, that'll wake you up. So what we have done in our GPS now, we'll put the groundhog holes in there. So we try to get around to fix them so you know when they're coming up. So just a little pro tip there when you're going here at these speeds. So, you know, again, just show this picture to, you know, if you're going to get weed control, it's not going to come from that 6-inch rye that you terminate that I showed at the beginning. It's going to come from pretty tall stuff. You need to have 100%, I like to say 200% coverage to make a point. In other words, more than just one layer of stems, a couple layers of stems, if you're going to do weed control. And some people don't understand that dynamic, but just think about it. It starts breaking down pretty quick if it's thin. Some of the leaves start breaking down quickly. So again, you're going to have to play around with this. This is something that you might not hit it right the first time, and every year is a little different. So important to understand that. I'm going to pause there because I'm going to change topics. Eric, any additional thoughts on anything I just talked about?
No, I thought it was well covered.
So those of you who are helping farmers and who also want to do experiments with cover crops, I mean, obviously there's hundreds of different mixes you could come up with, and there's dozens of species we could use depending on the time of the year. This is a cover crop mixed plot design that I saw in France and was just blown away. I had never seen anything like it before. If you look at this picture, you can't make heads or tails of it. So I wish I would have had a drone shot. You could see it a lot better. But this is the design here. So follow with me. I'll get my little pointer here. So here we have clover. So you go out here with your clover and you plant a half rate of, in this case, a single species. You can bring your drill around and you plant clover down this way. So right up here at this box, you have your full rate. so that would be where your full rate. Our next crop is Phacelia. I'm just using an example. We're gonna plant out here, you come around with your drill, you plant down here. And then I just put mustard in as the next thing, the same thing. So now what you got here is you have a clover Phacelia mix here, you have a clover mustard mix here, and then you can just follow the pattern. What's interesting is you have a clover mustard mix here and a second one over here. So you can look at everything twice. And what's really cool is to see the weed control differences in some of these mixes. This is better than a strip trial because you can see these patterns and you can see it twice. And you can do this with your drill. That's what you're normally going to do. It depends how big of an area you have. It's not that hard to do. That's what's so cool about it. So for those of you who do cover crop plots, try this sometime. It would make an awesome field day. We did this at the Pennsylvania No-Till Alliance field day at Jim Hershey's farm 2 years ago. I know he has a picture of the drone shot, and if I thought I should have asked him for it. But they actually stepped it up better, and they kept the area mowed between here. Now here it was pretty tight. I'm not sure if it was a 7-foot drill they used or something, but they actually mowed through here with a little 30-inch mower throughout the season, so they could actually walk through and look at it a lot better, so you don't have to trudge through it all. So it's a little idea. So I like to say, I can't take credit for this, but we've actually improved the French version here. So this is something that you can do to really start just seeing how this works on the farm, on a farm. Big, great field day. Any questions about that, Eric? Or I guess I don't know. Do you want to stop for some questions now, Lamont? Do we have any questions coming in? Would this be a good break? Because I'm probably halfway
sure
through.
would. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Let me just show you quickly the results of the poll.
Yeah.
Pleased to see, most of you feel very confident in talking with your farmers on a whole range of issues. That's good. And for those of you that feel a little uncertain about a particular topic, remember what Eric was saying, to play to your strengths when you're out there, while also learning about what maybe you're not so strong in. And I did put a link in the chat there about that brand new no-till and cover crop manual that the North Jersey RC&D has put together.
Oh, yeah.
It's probably not for people that have been involved in no-till and cover crops for a couple of decades, but on the other end of it, if you are really wanting to develop those skills and you want just to make sure you know all the basics, get that manual from them. And North Jersey RC&D, remember, New Jersey's the garden state, right? They do still have plenty of agriculture, and that RC&D office up there has a lot of really cool programming for no-till and cover crops. We work on field days with them. Secondly, I'll just mention this question number 2. We are working with a number of partners throughout the Bay region to use some new digital tools to identify farmers who are likely candidates to either increase their soil health program on their farm and or plant their streams with a buffer. And we're very excited that we're going to be able to kind of cut through a lot of the chaff and identify farmers that are really ready to take that next step. That's why we asked this question. Jen is going to be able to follow up with those of you who would like to work with us on this, because what we'd like to do is when we start getting the names of these farmers in who are kind of raising their hands, they want some assistance, we'd really like to hook them up with as local an expert as possible versus some big regional organization. So keep that in mind, and we'll tell you more about that. But our outreach to these farmers is going to start happening March 1st throughout the whole Bay watershed. So we're pretty excited about that. So let's get to some questions. And Ken Staver had a couple. Hi, Ken. First off, can you talk, either of you, about the reason for cover crop suppression of slugs? Why are we seeing that?
I'll just say that Penn State has done years now of study on this dynamic. And to put it simply in farmer terms, the slugs actually prefer cover crops to eat versus corn or soybeans. Dr. John Tooker has proven that in an aquarium. Yes, there's a slug aquarium that he has. So that's that's probably the best thing we can say. The other thing is it's been a little bit up and down in the research, but we're providing a better habitat for the predators, the wolf spiders, the carabid beetles, the things that eat slugs. And that's the two main things that are behind that.
Yeah, anything to add to that, Eric?
Nope, that's it.
And then Ken also asks, any soil disease or pest issues with planting beans into legume covers?
Nothing that has become alarming or concerning. But as Eric said, you always have one or two for whatever reason. That's just farming. That's just always will be probably. But
I've read some articles on legume cover crop and the pest bridge for sudden death syndrome and some other root diseases like that. I really haven't seen it, but it is something we're always keeping an eye out for, just to make sure.
Yeah. And a related question that came in from someone else: does the inclusion of hairy vetch and perhaps some other legumes eliminate the need for inoculant on soybeans?
that has nothing to do with it, because it's a great question, by the way. But the inoculant that a hairy vetch uses versus the inoculant a soybean uses is a completely different species, I'll say, of inoculant. Just to put it simply. So simply put, no, if you want to use, you need a hairy vetch inoculant, and then you need a soybean inoculant. They're two different things.
And Brian just asked about the name of the cover crop slicer. It's from Peckway Planner in Whitehorse, Pennsylvania. That is an Amish run shop, but I think you can get their phone number off the internet and just—
They have a website, actually.
Yeah. Oh, they got a website. Good. Yep. Galen asked, can you comment about planting depth for cover crop mixes with large and small seed?
We covered that, I think day one. I think we did, but you got to be careful because the smaller seeds can become buried. Now, there's compromise available though. You don't have to put a pea 1.25 inches deep. It'll grow at 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. It's not that sensitive to that. The only other problem is it's nice to cut a little deeper to get a better, so you don't have hairpinning. And we've also seen too, and this is not really, this is just anecdotal evidence, that when you have a line of seeds, a furrow of seeds going out there, those big seeds start, opening up the slot. When they start germinating, it helps the little ones come up. At least that's what we heard. I generally, the rule of thumb is 3/4 inch is a good all around depth. Although I got to admit, like if you're following the combine after grain, how do you set the drill? When maybe right along the corn row that was just harvested is, trash that's 6 inches deep. And there you just, all you really want to do, hope to do, is to get the seed down near enough the soil that it'll germinate. Whereas sometimes between the rows, it may be planting 2 inches deep. And there's where you don't really want to do, you want to bury a small seed like that. That being said, there's a few drills that you can separate the small seeds and the large seeds in a separate box, and you can redirect the tube from the small seeds. Right, I've seen some that are directed just so they're going right before the row closes. So it kind of sprinkles them right almost on the surface. So there's some little tricks in that to do that. But I will say it's not as bad of an issue you may think, just to mix them all together and go plant and kind of compromise your seeding depth.
And just so we can circle back to that question about that spring and fall planting that we talked about. And that person wrote back and said the reason they were planting spring oats is because they're a northern climate and oats are a cash crop up there.
Okay.
Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. So they wanted to plant the oats in the spring then to take off as a cash crop.
It was vetch and balanza clover in the fall, following beans, and then plant spring oats or barley in.
Well,
and the question was, how about the nitrogen availability to the oats or the barley?
Oh, it'll be available, but I think they're going to grow together. And is that a problem? If your oats is your cash crop, can you separate the oats from the clover and whatever the vetch? The answer is I know you can do that with seed separation, spiral seed separators. That's possible. And if that's where this is headed, try that, but very small acres to get it started. I know there's actually some progressive regenerative agriculture farmers that are one of the biggest challenges of growing wheat without fertilizer. You just don't get enough nitrogen, and so they're mixing peas with it, mixing peas and wheat. And if you feed it, you can actually feed that to cattle, that mix, but you can easily separate them. And so that's just a way to try to grow something, again, probably without fertility, without inputs. I know some people are messing with that. So that's just an idea, putting it out there of a similar type concept.
Arnell poses an interesting question regarding solid manure. Would it be more interesting to alternate 1 year having a manure application on half the farm and the other half being on cover crops, or trying to establish cover crops on the majority of the farm, which here is difficult due to lack of rain, and then spreading a much lighter application of manure?
My comment is that may be a year-to-year decision based on what options you have at the moment, at the time. I guess that's how I would answer that, because I don't really know what's how that really should work out. I would say you make the decision every year on ground conditions. If it's too wet, well, then you just don't haul manure. But I know you said it was dry, but sometimes dry areas do get wet, by the way. So I would toss that back and say it's going to be a year-to-year decision there.
There's a question here about grazing cover crops. We haven't really talked much about that, but it's a really important emerging concept. Question is, if you graze your cover crops in the spring, would you need to terminate the cover crop before planting your corn?
Oh, you probably will, because when you graze, you're taking off, some of the plant biomass, and I've heard of people say, what if I graze it to the ground, let the cattle out, graze it to the ground? That cover crop is going to want to grow back, and it has a head start, by the way, of your cash crop because it's already rooted. I would see that to be difficult to be able to pull that off. That would require very careful management, keeping the cattle off if it's a couple days of wet weather so it doesn't get compacted. That's a big stretch there, unless you're thinking that you're just growing the corn to come back in and maybe graze later, but that's generally not the case. I would rather do sorghum Sudan if that's the case. If it's if you're looking at a year-round grazing situation, but as described there, I don't think I would go down that road. I haven't figured that out yet.
One participant is curious about 60-inch corn that they plan to interseed for grazing late fall. The field is 25 acres, irrigated, and following soybeans. It was harvested later than anticipated, so was only able to seed cereal rye. I'm going to do half of a 16-row planter at 30 inches and half at 60 inch to compare cover crop growth and return on investment on both 60-inch and 30-inch. I don't own an interseed toolbar and plan to have local co-op broadcast with urea and water. Will this be effective, or shall I explore different avenues to plant the interseed mix? So we are getting really specific here.
That is, and we did cover 60-inch corn one of the other days, and I talked about it. And in the context of grazing, it definitely has merit, particularly in northern climates. I'm just going to say north of I-80 for the sake of definition of northern. I like the idea there. I'm a little concerned broadcasting the seeds out. If the weather isn't quite right, will they grow? How big is that rye going to be? Are those seeds going to be able to get down into to have seed to soil contact too dry to start growing? I mean, boy, I wish you could interseed it and actually put it in the ground. That's the weak point. That's the weak part of that theory right there. The concept is becoming stronger in the context of providing forage for grazing later on, because you're going to lose a little yield on 60-inch rows, but not as much as you think is what we're hearing, 5 to 10%, but you make up for that by having essentially 1 month extra growth of cover crops, which not only is a forage value, but it's a soil health value. So 60-inch corn, for those and I heard he has irrigation, that's a positive as well. So try it. I'm a little concerned about when you spread it with your urea that it's going to grow.
Hey, I am realizing that it's 1:07.
No.
This time goes fast, and a few of us are gonna stay on until 1:30. I think we can do that. Is that right, Steve?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, we're already over time. Apologize about that. So if you need to go and you're looking for credits, again, look for that email from Jen. That'll be your process. And this is our last webinar for this week. I think we really had fun with it. I know my brain almost hurts from the amount of information I'm trying to quickly integrate. But I just want to thank you, Steve, in particular, for all 4 days, and Eric for your presentation today. And also all of you, we just had tremendous response this week. So it was really a lot of fun to do this with you all. So thanks. We're ending officially, but we will continue on with some more questions, get through as many as we can.
Yeah, I'll just follow up, Lamont, just a little between us here. So I do have a few more slides, and because this is recorded and people can go back and look at it later, do you want me to finish those slides and then
Sure.
wrap up with questions?
Maybe just go through them as quickly as you can.
Okay, I'll just go ahead and do that. Those of you who can't stay, get the recording later on. I wanted to touch on cover crops planted after wheat. This would be if you're not doing double crop beans. I got them listed there. You've been looking at them for the last 10 minutes, so I'm going to move on. This is how a sorghum Sudan grass, sun hemp, and radish look after the first killing frost. So what happens then is that tall plants are freezing out. That gives a chance for the sunlight to come down, and the radishes can really flourish then in November. So this is just a good production opportunity here. I got the seeding rates up there. These are pretty solid seeding rates for doing something like this. I apologize, I'm gonna have to move right on through them, but watch it later and pause it. Radish and oats, this is like the cover crops with training wheels. If you're consulting someone that wants to start easy into cover crops, radish and oats is definitely the way to go. Again, I have some seeding rate recommendations listed up there that this could really apply for. Now, the other thing I didn't really cover yet was fast establishment for cover crops. So I had to show this picture once in a while because it's pretty cool. You don't see this very often. This is actually in Brazil. But here you see the planters are following the soybean harvest. Now, I honestly, well, I've been told that this is cover crops, so I'm assuming it is. I know cover crops are big in Brazil, but the point of this picture is to show follow the combine. And I've done there, I dug out some old research that I did on my farm. This is a little bit busy, but what you note up here in the top left-hand corner is planted August the 18th. This would have been after wheat. It was left, the weeds, I'll say, were allowed to grow a couple weeks. We sprayed them off. And there's different cover crops listed on the side here. The codes are triticale, cereal rye, annual ryegrass, tillage radish, and oats. What you'll see here is that the radish every time puts the most biomass on. It's a very quick grower. It grows faster than cereal rye in the fall. But what's interesting is we go over here and we see September the 5th, you can see our biomass, as expected, slows down. Planted October the 3rd, it's very little. But if we take this chart here, see this is by the thousands of pounds per acre. If we take along the bottom part here, you don't see much, but if we only chart it in 50-pound increments, we can still see that the radish is putting the quickest growth on of any of the other cover crops. But the point between the October 3rd planting here, the September 5th, and the August 18th is the value of getting cover crops planted on time. And that's really the take-home message here of this slide. So have your planter and drill ready. Follow the combine if you can. I had listed that early on in our first day. Or you have a young person that's just learning to drive, and you put them on a cover crop planter before your corn planter. That's a good option to get them started. Or an older retired person in the community. They know what they're doing. You can trust them, and they can come in and run your equipment for you, or have your fields custom planted. There are some farmers who have actually created a business. I know of a couple farmers who have actually bought drills and gone around and done custom planting. Have your seed ready to go. That's a thing that farmers slip up on. This falls under that treat your cover crops like your cash crops. We all have our soybeans and corn when ready, right? You're trained for that. Is your seed purchased? Is it delivered? Is it ready to plant? Very important. Broadcasting for speed, you know, broadcasting has its limitations, but you can't beat it for speed. Even going through double crop beans, which we probably should have spent some more time on here, but this has gone through double crop beans before leaf drop. Broadcasting at this stage of the year, usually in September, is a little more effective, but it doesn't guarantee it. I've seen some great success with this. I've seen some options where it didn't work that good. There's all kinds of different seeders out there that can do this. I just showed you a couple, spinning and air delivery. Vertical tillage tools, throwing on a cover crop seeder is an option. So this is just a little bit better than broadcasting. There's a little bit soil stirred up. I'm not a fan of vertical tillage, but if that's what you have, that's what you're doing. For goodness sake, plant some cover crops. You want a little bit more creative, put your cover crop seeder on your combine. There's some different versions of that out there. You can see there for corn, we're blowing the seed right underneath the snouts. And that actually works good. I did that in my farm just to demo it. Or you can put it on a soybean head, then you're gonna blow the seeds out right behind the header. And then as you come out the back of the combine, it kind of covers it up. What do you think of this? Here we're drilling seeds, cover crop seeds, on as we combine. That's pretty cool. I saw this come out about a year or two ago, and it's funny, just the last week or two, it's been circulating the ag social media circles. It's over in Germany or somewhere in Europe, but that's a pretty cool setup. Aerial seeding, we have airplanes, we have helicopters. There's actually some people are putting aerial seed on right before harvest. I'm talking about a day or two before corn harvest. That works with corn, not with soybeans, because soybeans, the leaves are already down and your seeds are going to be on top, but that's another idea. Good used drills sometimes are cheap, just saying that, to do some custom planting. And here's an idea, especially when you're doing beans. Usually you can't start doing beans till 10, 11 or noon, till the dew dries off. Plant your cover crops in the morning. I know that it's not as brittle and dry out there, but these good drills we have nowadays, it's just a strategy, and I know that's what some farmers do. So that is my presentation. I got it in Lamont, so there you see it. I'm just going to say now, thank you. I've enjoyed doing this. I'll put another plug in for my book there. And since some people were begging me to do an audio version, I'm considering it. If you're interested in the book I wrote, go to stevegroff.com. Now let's just hang on here for some questions for a couple minutes, Lamont, and we'll wrap this 4-day webinar up here.
All right. And Steve, when I was on the wheat harvest back in the early 80s, we saw a crew that had that many combines that you showed in that Brazil picture, but there were no cover crop seeders following them. This is in the early 80s. Okay. Let's start in, should you roll cover crop before planting or wait till after planting green and then roll? What are some timing or management techniques for either of those?
There's reasons to do both. One of the big reasons for doing it rolling after you plant is that you can roll, follow the rows that you planted. Because if you roll first, you take rye stems and roll them down, have to plant across it, it's very difficult. Unless you have like a Peckway Planter type deal, and most of us aren't going to have that. So that's an advantage for planting first. Another is if it's wet and you just want that cover crop to grow a little bit more, let's say it's not that tall, why not wait a few days? Now with corn, you want to roll before it comes up, or you just want to roll it because it doesn't like shade. Soybeans, on the other hand, if it's wet, on the wetter side, they can grow a couple leaves, then you can roll them. Even if you damage a few by rolling, it doesn't seem to hurt them. If you do roll beforehand, it's certainly nice if you have GPS and you can kind of roll according to the width of your planter and figure that out. So that's the biggest difference there. And I'll just remind us again, if it gets dry, if it is dry and there's no rain in sight, you might want to compromise at that point and terminate your cover crop early. So it doesn't suck out all the moisture and your cash crop can never grow for who knows how long. That being said, the longer you're in this system, the longer you're in a regenerative agriculture system, the better it'll be, the more resilient your soil is. But it's, again, something that you need to understand when you're managing the rolling versus when you plant.
And just so you all know, Eric has another meeting at 1:30, so he had to step off. So Steve's going to have to take everything from here on. What are your thoughts on pasture cropping?
Pasture cropping, boy, I'd like a little bit more explanation of what exactly that means.
I'll ask, see if he can do some follow-up with that. Steve, you said when you roll, it's time to roll, and plant when it's time to plant because you're growing vegetables. For cash grain farmers, would you recommend the same, or would planter-mounted rollers be better to save a trip across the field?
Well, the problem with the planter ones is they are expensive. It's not cheap. It's over $1,000 per roll, so per row. So yeah, there's a factor there. It's cheaper to buy another separate one. That being said, there are more and more farmers that are going that route that are more committed to this system. So I can't say there's a right and wrong answer there. If you're it depends on your style of farming, your availability of help. It does not take long to roll, and you can roll. You can literally roll at night. You can roll early in the morning when it's still wet, when conditions aren't that good to plant. So there's some things to consider there. I would almost recommend that you, if you've never rolled before and you're not really comfortable with it, to keep it separate, to roll separate. But that being said, the both ways are right. You're going to have to decide what works best for your operation. I don't know what else to say. The both ways are correct. It's it just depends on how you're set up.
The person that asked about pasture cropping said that he's talking about the pasture cropping that Colin Seiss in Australia is trying.
Okay, I'm familiar with Colin, and if you guys want to be pushed a little bit, most of you check some of his stuff out. He's out there in a good way, by the way. I've learned from him, and he actually gave a nice review in my book, I'll say, by the way. And I am not totally familiar with the pasture cropping, the whole concept of how that works. So again, I'm gonna have to, before I meander around, I am not as familiar with that. If it does mean that you know, fields that were pastures that were grazed and you put crops in it, I don't know why not. So I guess I'm sorry. I just I gotta learn a little bit more about Colin Seiss's pasture cropping, I guess.
Hey, I tell you, it's hard to play Stump the Chump with Steve Groff, but someone just did.
We just did.
Okay. Do you use white or red mustard at any time? Can they help suppress slugs or weeds?
Okay, so I've tested them. I regularly do not. My brassica of choice is, first of all, radish, and then I go to oilseed rape that survives the winter. There are certain mustards out there that can suppress nematodes. That's a fact. Some of them are allegedly designed, you need to, kind of work them into the soil, which I don't do because I'm a no-till farmer. We have not identified a clear effect on slugs. It was mentioned about that. I would say there's not an obvious detriment to slugs. I just think the whole system is all about using cover crops and diversity, and all that stuff is more going to be more helpful than a specific cover crop. Now, if there's some comes along, or if there's something I'm not aware of, which is entirely possible, I don't know of a mustard that's going to really dramatically affect slugs.
Right. There was a seed dealer and cover crop advocate up in central PA who he laid out a whole series of plots just with as many different kinds of cover crop species as you could find, simply to see what the slugs preferred. And there was very stark differences.
Was there?
I can't remember the differences, other than to say that some of those cover crop strips were completely mowed down by the slugs. It was a bad year. He knew it. Whereas others were hardly touched.
Yeah, but
So
if you're planting a cash crop in there, I would want to plant the cover crops that the slugs ate.
yeah, exactly. You could look at it either way. Yes, exactly. Yeah. You mentioned your simultaneous corn/sump hemp experiment didn't work out. Have you had other successful uses of sun hemp?
Using, well, I'm sorry, you cut out there.
Oh, sorry. Well, the corn with sun hemp experiment didn't work out so well. Have you had other successful uses of sun hemp?
So sun hemp, I like sun hemp to be planted right after wheat harvest if you're not going to double crop beans, or as I like to say, greedy beans. That's another topic. But so during the month of July in South Central Pennsylvania, so just give you a reference, zone 6B. Once you get into August, it starts to quickly fade, the sun hemp window, because sun hemp is photosensitive. When the days start getting shorter, it stops, it doesn't grow as quickly. It's a tropical plant. So it's not made for this area except over the summer. Then I would lean toward, if you're in the beginning of August, again, my region, lean toward cowpeas if you're looking at a summer annual. Cowpeas will grow a little bit longer. Sun hemp, as soon as the temperatures start dropping into the 40s, it like gets cold and doesn't want to grow. It just doesn't grow much. So sun hemp is, for me, I mean, if you have an opportunity to plant in June, I've done it then just to see how it grows. It'll grow like gangbusters, but once you get into August, its window's over. Sun hemp is the ability to grow extremely fast, put a significant amount of nitrogen on, and you know, it's just a different type of legume. It's an erect legume that I love it. I love sun hemp, but it has pretty narrow window of application.
We got a question from Odin who asks, after the termination of the cover crop, have you ever used microbiological spray to help break down the herbicide cover crop itself for faster nitrogen release?
So I've never done that. I've heard of that. 15, 20 years ago, I would have probably been all over that. In the past 5 years, I have started to not use other products as rapidly as I used to, much to the chagrin of all the salesmen that call me. And I guess you guys can figure this out. I get all the time people drive into my farm and they want me to use their product, which just basically solves everybody's problem. And then they want me to talk about it. And I pretty much said no every time, because frankly, I'm using less inputs now. I'm trying to see what I don't need. And I don't think I do after all this. So that's a little bit of my story, where I'm coming from. So to answer the question, I have not done that. And I'm not saying that it won't work. Please understand that. But so the answer is no, I have not tried that.
And I'll just say, thank you, Steve. A number of people just in the chat box have really thanked you for all you've offered this week. And I'll just mention the Jansky family from Minnesota writes, thank you, Steve, for putting this on from Minnesota, and really appreciate how you run your farm. This was a great webinar. Being in different parts of the country and still learning from others' experience. That's what it's all about, right?
Yeah. Awesome.
Just a couple more questions, and I'll ask, don't submit any more questions because we're almost close to wrapping up here. So do you see many farmers planting cover crops and then following with an application of liquid manure to assist with moisture? We have some dairy farmers doing this with success using 8,000 gallon per acre dairy manure.
Now, I've heard of this. And again, that's going to come down to the situation, the year. Is it too wet? Do they have to get rid of the manure? Is there pit or lagoon full? All these questions go out there. I mean, that's a type of question where it's probably very farm specific. The answer is yes. A lot of farmers, it doesn't even cross their mind to just put 1,000 gallon per acre. That's just not much. But there's a lot of farmers who understand the value of putting multiple applications of manure on to get more out of it. And it depends on your location, how far you have to travel. Do you have drag lines? All this stuff enters in to that. So yes, it's a good idea.
Derek asked if you can plant into a terminated cover crop with a hoe drill.
Well, I have seen some hoe drills. First of all, no experience myself. I have seen some hoe drills that have been pretty impressive if they have multiple ranks and they're spaced far enough apart and have a coulter in the front. So I actually have been impressed by hoe drills, and I understand why they're used. One reason is, I'll just say, is it's no hairpinning, and that can be a problem. One detriment is they move more soil. So depends on how you're at with how much soil you want to move. You know, there's an issue there. If that's what you have, and you know that's what you use. I know that they're very popular in Australia. I kind of see some of those areas moving both ways, so it can be done. It would take a lot to convince me that that's the way to go. Is maybe how I'll wrap that answer up.
Your cereal rye rates are much lower than some others I've seen, and you've mentioned earlier this week that one of your concerns about high rates was lodging. If the goal is organic weed control, what advice would you offer in this?
Yeah, so we're talking something different. If you're trying to use your cover crop for weed control, you want higher rates, and maybe double of what I suggested. It depends on the calendar date. So I would suggest here in my area of southeastern Pennsylvania, if you're in the month of September, beginning of the month, a bushel of rye is probably good enough, even for weed control. But then as you get to the end of September, bushel and a half, 2 bushels at October the 1st, and go up to 3 bushels by the end of October, if that's what your objective is. But then you got to be careful, especially guys that manure. Sometimes if their spreader doesn't do a nice even spread, if it's liquid, you get these spots where it just grows so much and goes down, and you have skippers, and you know, you'll pretty soon see how good of a manure spreader applicator you are after something like that. So again, just common sense things to keep in mind, and you got to just try yourself to see what works in your farm. Is I guess a simple answer to that.
Just 2 more questions, then we're done. When planting in the direction of the rolled cover crop, can you plant in the opposite direction of the roll, not across?
So you can, and it's been done, and everybody's tried it. It's possible. It depends on the way your planter's set up. Sometimes it kind of scuff it up and bring it back around. And if you're really looking for weed control, that's not a good idea. If that's not the big thing you're doing it for, it can be done. I'll just say it does depend on your planter, how it's set up, but planting across, no.
And Robert, I hope you're still on because we finally got to your question. If rolling wheat for weed control before beans, would 1 bushel, 2 bushel, or 3 bushels be advised?
Well, as I kind of outlined before, to answer that question, you know, say, well, when are you planting it? Again, the earlier you plant it, the less you need. And some of that's going to come from experience in your area, you know, how good the seed conditions are. This is why, you know, just like in our cash crops, we tend to tweak things a little bit. You're going to be tweaking things with your cover crops. It's a great opportunity to try some seeding rates. It's very easy to just, it takes 1 minute to get off your drill and adjust the seeding rate. And there you go. There's your own research. You get your own answers. But I would say I'll take the middle one there to answer this question, 2 bushel, and go from there.
Okay, that's it. So I think we can tell those of you, we still have close to 90 participants on. So thanks for hanging in there with us. Hope this extended discussion was helpful. And I hope we can do this again, Steve, honestly.
Yeah,
so
it was fun.
And for those of you that would be interested in working with us on that follow-up to some farmers in the Chesapeake Bay region who want some new assistance in the area of soil health, maybe buffers, we'll be in touch about that, because the more local we can get with that assistance, the better, for sure. Okay, Steve, with that, let's call it a day, and thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
See you next time. All right, take care.